What's up, folks? Casual Dad here with another Warhammer Combat Cards Warlord guide. And before I get too into it, I'm going to be gesturing with my hands, so I don't want to forget. My daughter was very excited to paint nails tonight, and so you may see some a little extra glitter beyond the usual, which is weirdly thematic for Ghosar, who is our Warlord of interest right now. We're looking at Supreme Commander Ghosar, and this is one where I was traveling the month that Ghosar came out. Um, and then at the time of this recording, we're something like 9 hours out from Shinto Bean's curated exploration campaign for the 5th anniversary of Warhammer Combat Cards. So it's a really exciting time when there's a lot going on, and it's taken me a while to get around to this one. But I wanted to go ahead and take some extra time. And this is an especially interesting one, so it was very cool to get the extra time to kind of play around with him. So weighing in at 80 points, he is the cheapest of the Supreme Commanders, and so far has the distinction to me of being the first one that is outright better in the 200 deck point ladder modes than he is in PvP. Now, I'll try to get in some more synced PvP games with him at some point soon so I can actually kind of show that in play. But I found he fell a little bit behind the others. And there are several Supreme Commanders who are quite good at the 400 deck points mode. And I'm not sure that Ghosar competes. And we're going to talk a little bit about why. But he's extremely good in the ladder because his ability relies heavily on efficiency. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first, we'll look at the stats. For 80 points, he competes competes with the Avatar for outrageous punchiness, especially at that price point. Extremely powerful base with that 105 melee, or excuse me, 105 psychic, 126 melee, almost 400 hit points, and then primary trait of inspiring presence and secondary trait of fear. So buffs his own stats by 50% ish at max level. Let's say it's, yeah, 30%, excuse me. But I mean, still, buffs his own stats by 30% plus has fear to really stick on the table. He's a little bit on the squishy side for Supreme Commanders, especially from the flanks, which is good, I think, because that's both in keeping with the non-Supreme Commander version of the Warlord, but then also is in keeping with his. It is a nice balance to how hard he hits. So speaking of that, he's got the typical two-part ability for a Supreme Commander. The first part is the first time each friendly card with a cost of 10 or less, so cheaper cards, is destroyed, add a token of that card to your deck. A couple things about tokens. Tokens don't have traits. So I went into this immediately, was like, I'm going to cheese this. I'm going to do Medica and Deathblow and get 2 copies of each. It doesn't work that way. But we'll talk about some other ways you can cheese that in a second. So you get free copies of your Horde cards. This is the first Warlord that truly encourages Horde play, and even more than that part, the second part of the ability reads, additionally, each time a friendly card is deployed, increase the base attack of all of your cards, excluding those in play, by 10%. So as you're playing cards throughout the game, everything still sitting in your deck is getting buffed up, which is phenomenal. So yeah, it's really good. Hard to really put that together on paper, so I'm going to take a look at some decks. And I shouldn't have previewed that one, spoilers. But so his primary ability is every time you play a card that costs 10 or less, then that card, when it is destroyed, will get a token to your deck. So I've got 3 cards in this first deck that when they're played, once they're destroyed, a new copy will go into my deck. And because they are endless, I get 3 copies of each out of that. So I get the first drop, the second life, and then the token from that first drop when it dies. So you play, with 3 of them in the deck, you play a total of 9 cards for 3 of your card slots. So it's very effective, and every single time you play one of those, it triggers a 10% buff to all of these stats of the cards still in your deck, including your tokens. That's going to come up later. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. And now this deck really leans on those endless cards to kind of build up the end game bonus, and then there's a couple of just kind of mainstay melee cards of mine that I think are particularly powerful and really benefit well. Just because I mentioned before, Ghosar's buff is a percent buff, so the higher something's base stats are, the more it's going to benefit from that 10% that you just saw trigger with that flag icon. See that again right here. Little wavy flag, whippy wavy flag, showing that you got the 10% bonus. Now, right here, I want to highlight this moment. This is one of the downsides of Ghosar, is that he really encourages running a full deck, which really is very challenging if you're trying to draw specific things. So I almost always end up playing a non-endless card fairly early, even though I want to play my endless cards first and play them all out first. So already we had one. My Gargoyle has generated a token and at its second life. My dude over here has generated a token, given its second life. So I have played 3 cards and had a total of 5 drops come up. So a 50% buff to every single card in my decks. Yeah, boom. just adding up real quick. This guy's particularly good for 16 points. That attack stat buffs up real quick. And Furious Charge is really nice to get the extra efficiency out of this. It is very, and I use this poison guy for similar reason. He has just a bunch of extra efficiency where he can effectively do damage, even if he is not played last. So you want to keep your heavy hitters, you want to play your tokens and your endless cards first and really build up your bonuses. So you're not playing the other non-token cards before you have to. But so the poison card and then that 16-point Furious Charge are really good because of their efficiency. So they combo well in the deck. This guy I try to keep in as long as possible. Yeah, that'll do it. And so you can see that Furious Charge hits very hard. And there we go again. And now I'm not really keeping track here. I think we're at about 80%, maybe even 90% buff to cards in hand and deck. And again, that applies to your tokens as well. So this guy's attack stats are adding up too. But one big downside of leaning entirely on the endless cards as your cheap little fillers is that their stats start out so low that so a 10% increase to stats could be like 1 damage, which is not very impressive. This guy, on the other hand, starting out with that insane base melee with Death Blow is a very, very powerful combo. Bum, 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 bum. Should have some music with this. It's just me chattering. Anyway, this should be a fairly comfortable win. I have been laddering quite a bit with this guy, and my Tyranids are pretty high ranked at this point, so it should be a fairly comfortable win, but this is still a decent game. I've been ranking up, and so my cards at this point are pretty scary. You can take it. Death Leaper, let's see if he kills him outright. He did! 225 damage on that Death Leaper. Even at that rank 2 rank 2 Furious Charge, that hits extremely hard coming out of the gate. Yeah, so comfortably here. Very easy win. And you can just see that the Ghosar's early game is not very good because you're just feeding a bunch of your cards, but those cards do some damage, and as your heavier and medium hitters are coming out, they're very impactful because they have the buffed attack stats. Now it's very cool, but what it really adds up to is that your end game is insane. So yeah, and we'll get to that one with this next deck. Loading. And now I believe I mentioned while we're waiting for that to load, Ghosar is the cheapest of the Supreme Commanders, coming in again at 80 points, which puts him a little bit cheaper than some of the major ones. Come on now. Boop, there we go. Okay. So that was deck 1, where we have the 3 endless cards. We've got a couple medium hitters, and then just a filler here at the 12. And then these 2 are my real heavy swing hitters that I really rely on to close out games. That Furious Charge is incredibly powerful to clear a bodyguard and then take out the one next to it. And then that Death Blow is a great bonus on this guy. All ways where you can get additional value out of the increased attack stats. Very effective. My deck 3 is one I really like too, because one of the cool things, well, actually, we'll go ahead and play this one. Yeah, so again, I've got some of the same endless cards. I've got him in here and I've got him in here. I've got a lot fewer endless cards because I needed the card slots to kind of fill this up. What I love about this one, though, is it has a really strong secondary trait of ranged, a lot of cards that can shoot or melee, and it really leans on your Genestealer cults. Like, this is the first time I've really felt incentivized to run Genestealer cults as a block, as cults. So we're going to run this one too. This is my second deck. And again, I don't have as many endless cards in here, but I do have more sub 10-point cards. So I actually get more tokens on net out of this deck than I do out of the other one, even though it's not all the endless cards. So that is something that's important to bring up. Still want to play that guy early. Ooh, yuck. And one thing I really wanted to highlight is this guy. He's under 10 points, but look at that base attack stat. Like, that is going to add up real fast when you start dropping additional cards, and that is why I bring him in here. That guy will add up, so we'll go ahead and do that. So that's one of the things I like to highlight, because this guy and then the melee version of this, I never ever run because I don't feel like there's any reason to take them. But if I put them in this deck, I get 2 of them, because I get the original copy and then I get the token. And now the token doesn't have that big game hunter, but what it does have is that just phenomenal ranged attack stat. And that again also is pumped up. The token's attacks are also increased as long as it's in your deck. And that was something I really wanted to highlight because it's something that I hadn't thought of initially, and I was really excited when I found out about it. He's going to die here. That's right. And this is a weird deck because it's so much a mix of your Genestealer cults and, oh god, we'll put you in there. Because it's such a mix of Genestealer cults and Genestealer cults, it is all Genestealer cults. It's not a mix. It's a mix of attack types and kind of weird cards that fit together a little bit strangely. So it's very good at alternating attack types, like so. Not so good at going all in on one. So it's a little bit more flexible, and it's just kind of a cool deck. We'll see how this goes. This should also be a comfortable win. I'm up against the Swarmlord. Interesting. That's where the actual mix of attack types is very helpful. Go ahead and weigh in here. These guys are over 15, unfortunately, but they do have that big Game Hunter. So I have 2 cards in here with big Game Hunter, and so it feels very much like this insurgent force. They keep just kind of moving and shifting, and getting extra guys popping up, and just constantly getting stronger the longer they're fighting, and it's pretty fun. Ooh, geez, goodness. I want to hit in melee. Yeah, we'll do that. How hard are you hitting? Pretty hard. And it is interesting how this Warlord is held back a little bit by cards in play not receiving the buff, whereas cards in your hand do. And I'm still sitting on 6 cards in my hand. Wow. All right. I'm doing just fine. But yeah, like here, a token hitting for 80 damage. We'll put this guy in here and see what happens. Bloop. Phenomenal death blow. And I'm sitting on, yeah, 90% attack stat buff. Gotta put you in, coach. This dude, 85 damage on a 6-point card. 64 damage on a 5-point card. And then, of course, you do want to play your heavy hitters last again, so we'll pop this guy in here and see how hard he hits. He's going to hit real hard. And having that mixed attack types is very helpful against the Swarmlord, who loves shutting off your bonuses. Look at that. That just swung for 300 damage on a 30-point card. Yeah. Like I was saying, Ghosar is very, very good in the competitive ladder, and there are just a lot of ways to build him that are really fun, but he still very much rewards strategic deck building and strategic play and feels really thematic the whole time I'm playing him. So all of these things make him one of my favorite Warlords by a good bit, and a really fun one to play. Now, I saved the best for last. So the first deck is just kind of your standard Tyranid melee that works really well with Ghosar. That second one was a very thematic, like Genestealer cults deck. Now I'm going to look at kind of the idea behind one of the best ladder builds that I had. And one of the big things that is challenging, or excuse me, not ladder, PvP, like a synced PvP, especially Apocalypse mode with the 400-point decks, that's where I felt Ghosar was the weakest. And you can get around that. And one of the dark sides to the Warlord is that he is very cheesable. So you can build on his ability and really lean it into the most powerful card in the Tyranid faction, which continues to be this guy. I do think that this is still probably one of the best cards in the game, and almost certainly one of the best cards in the Tyranid faction, especially if you can double his attack stats. So a couple things about this. It leans on him, of course. The Maliceptor is kind of your ace in the hole that gives you a really powerful end game. This guy's in here because he's very efficient, has a really strong attack types and that inspiring presence, also has a psychic attack. So your end game is these two and Ghosar just like blasting the board with psychic. So, and then the rest is just all of your endless cards. I think this is every single endless card you can possibly bring. So you're just cheesing the heck out of the tokens. Let's actually see it in play. In the 400 deck point mode version, you also want to throw in the other Psionic Blast Tyranid, the Fear one. Ooh, this is going to be interesting. Because that one just really doubles down in your end game with those extra attacks. And the theme here, of course, in every single deck that I've mentioned, is the theme is you're really trying to get as much out of the trait as you can. You're not just using the trait, you're trying to like get multiple copies of cards multiple times, really good attack stats. It's not just your endgame pieces, it is just your kind of everything, right? So I'm talking about smart play, like the play order and all that. And this is the first deck of the ones that I've built that really has a big edge in that it can control your deck order, where all of the other ones, because they're full decks, it's very challenging to not play your power pieces until the end. Whereas in this, you are just filling with tokens, you're filling with endless cards, so you have a really easy time holding your power cards back, which is a really important strategic piece because you want your power cards in the end game. You don't want to play one when it's got like a 20% attack buff. You want to play them when they have that like 80 or 90% attack buff. Okay, we go. Let's see what we got here. We got a 130% attack buff. There it is. And I got a little 5-point endless card here hitting for 90 damage. And now this is going to be interesting. My dude's going to take a bunch of damage, and we are going to have Ghosar on the board here. And yeah, so ups and downs in this one, right? So this, I do think, is quite possibly the most powerful Ghosar deck that I've built. Let's see here. Can he possibly take that out? No. We'll try it anyway. And so here's our endgame deck, right? We'll see if this works. But we've got Ghosar on the board, max buff on all these guys. I can hit in either melee or psychic. Probably want to lean on the psychic as long as possible, but I should be able to close this out. Especially with the fear on Ghosar, even though it's rank 1 fear. We'll see how this goes. I think I've got it pretty comfortably. Ooh, comfortable is not the word I would use there. But look at that. This sucker's doing 60 damage across the board. He swings for almost 350 damage. Yeah. And I could do Psychic here if it was even more risky, or I could just hammer this guy. So that is the most powerful synced PvP Apocalypse mode deck I was able to build, just leaning really heavily on those extremely strong Psychic pieces. And one of the key pieces is, again, that deck control, being able to control what you're playing when. Because with Ghosar, you don't need a full deck because you're getting those extra tokens. So even if you don't use all of your card slots, you're using more than your card slots. If you just really emphasize the endless cards and then fill with some of your more expensive stuff. So there is something there, but I personally really had trouble in the synced PvP with Ghosar, and I'm looking forward to another chance. But it was very striking to see how well he performed in the 200-point ladder versus how poorly he performed in the 400-point Apocalypse mode. So that was pretty cool. Very, very cool Warlord. I really like playing him. And I was very excited to make this video, but I held off for a while because there were just a lot of moving parts to think about. So just a really quick look at those decks again. You've got first, and we'll go in reverse order. We're looking first at the PvP deck that I've built. This is the proxy PvP deck. And this one is not as good in the ladder, but what we just saw was against a really terrible Ghosar matchup in Patriarch. Because Patriarch is able to just sweep through your endless cards and your tokens, you are not having an impact. Against most other Warlords, you're getting at least some chip damage off from your endless cards. They're doing a little range, a little melee. They're chipping off shields, taking out like second life cards. They're actually doing a fair amount of damage over the course of the game. Whereas in a Patriarch, it's taking away all your extra damage. It's just sweeping the board. But this still was fairly comfortably able to finish out that game, even as a level 3 Ghosar against a fairly high level Patriarch. So that was pretty instructive. But deck 1, again, is your fairly standard melee. It is always a little bit funny putting the Gargoyle in there, but he does shoot back against softer shooting targets, but mostly he's just there for the buff and the bodies. But he does kind of work again, and this one, again, leans really heavily on that Death Blow and that Furious Charge here and here. Little melee ready to bump up, and then Poison, so you have something you don't mind playing early. And then, of course, your Endless cards to give you the bonus to your endgame pieces. And that is one of the funny things about him, is he's one of the first Warlords that I have built specifically for endgame. There are a lot of decks out there that like alphas, where they hit really early, but most of them are kind of balanced, where you want cards that can hit early, cards that can be defensive, and then cards that can be good in the endgame. Whereas Ghosar is very much like, I am playing for the endgame, which is high risk, high reward that I also enjoy, and also just very unique. So that's pretty cool. And then, of course, we've got deck 3, which is the very thematic Genestealer cults. And I still want to highlight, I haven't seen anyone running it, but these guys with that base ranged, and like just looking at this, there is a melee version, the rock drill guy, right? Yeah, now just to say this, I did the death blow so I could have 2 copies. You can still do that if you have either this 3-point or the 7-point death blow in there. That's still a really effective strategy, even if the token that comes out doesn't actually have death blow. So yeah, which is a bit of a bummer, but I get it too. Yeah, this one. Yeah. You can see both of them would have very significant death blows and hit really hard if you kept them a little bit later in the game. But I think you get more out of a beefier, heavier Deathblow like the Abominant. Yeah, Abominant. God, weird name. But the other one I was looking at is this guy. So if you're going a melee heavy Cults deck, this guy in here will hit very hard, and you get 2 copies, so you can throw him at stuff without worrying too much about losing him because you'll get to use him twice. And the second one will have a lot more time to buff up his melee attack and hit extremely hard, even if he doesn't have Big Game Hunter because it'll be a token. Yeah, so good with Fear, of course, great with this guy, who also has that Inspiring Presence and Furious Charge. Better with this guy, of course, as he gets high level. Mine is quite low level, so he's not very good, but as he adds up, he's definitely going to be a strong piece in Ghosar decks, which is great. Again, that goes with the theme. But I mentioned the other Psionic Blast Psyker, that was this guy. If you go the Genestealer Cults route, I didn't really get to play with this very much in the Synced PvP, but you could have your Rock Grinder in there. Let's see what else. I think that's the only culty stuff. So the Genestealer Cults being a viable faction with him is a lot of fun, but it is very challenging to build the Genestealer Cults themed deck at 400 deck points because there's not much you can throw in there that is that expensive for cults. So you'll have to throw in something else that's very expensive to fill it out. But yeah, anyway, that is the guide for Ghosar. Hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, until next time.